So over to you, Hank.
Thank you. Well, I'm mindful of the fact that I'm between all of you and coffee break, so I'll try to be fast. I want to start first just say as a practitioner, I tend to be involved in all these issues, but just keep my head down and get on with it. And it's been great to sit here and see how a lot of other people have dealt with the challenge. With Sunan Prasad, though, I want to jump scale and begin to think about how these kind of projects actually sit within regions and how that's terribly important. This is an image of the San Francisco Bay Area where we mapped carbon emissions in two different ways. On the left by per square mile, and you see the center of San Francisco as being the dirty part of the region if you think about it on a per square mile basis. But if you look at it on a per capita or per household basis in terms of carbon emissions, the center of the city and the built-up population centers of San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose are really the cleanest parts of the city. And this reverses the way environmentalists have been training us to think about cities as dirty, polluted places. Really, when you begin to think about resource efficiency, cities and density, connectedness, and access to public transport are the salvation of the planet. And as we move to a time when 50% of our population is in cities in the world, and increasing by 2 billion over the next 20 years in cities, this becomes an important part of thinking about it. And so just where you locate has an enormous amount, as we heard from Sonoma Mountain Village, to do with it. This is the same map for Chicago, with the center of Chicago, with those wonderful Louis Sullivan buildings being the cleanest part of the city. And this is that curve for Chicago, San Francisco, and LA in terms of density. And you see what happens is you move from suburban locations to mid-rise locations where you have terraces and mansion blocks and flats. You begin to see differences. You begin to see greater efficiency. You don't have to go high-rise, though, because the chart levels out as you go to mega densities. And it was interesting to see that all of the projects were really at that mid-rise density. And this looks at the notion of jobs plus density in Sydney and shows the same scale from Jeff Kenworthy's analysis. We've been applying this in Walthamstow in East London around the notion of trying to build a town center which is very accessible. It's on the Victoria line and has overground service into the city in 22 minutes to really try to figure out how to blend that optimum access of public transport and walkability and density to make something work. And we modeled carbon emissions for London to begin to look at that. And what we find is that Kensington and Chelsea is the most efficient part of London. Mid-rise, terraced housing, mansion blocks from a transport standpoint, built in the last century for the most part, are the places where we use the least carbon. And so it is where we sit within the region that really matters. And so I think that would turn me to the second point, which is the issue of integration into the city. And I'll go to a small project that we've done in Saudi Arabia, looking in Jazan at the south of the city, looking at applying many of the same lessons that we saw with Masdar in a way, though, that integrates the project into the existing neighborhoods. And you can just sort of see on the edge of the side the existing grid, which we found, like Foster at Masdar, really didn't optimize the prevailing winds or deal with the climate. And the way that's moved into a traditional Islamic neighborhood, employing the notions of capturing the cooling winds, having green space, and beginning to use traditional Islamic street patterns and architectural patterns to begin to reflect a place that not only is sustainable from the standpoint of energy tech, but also from the standpoint of fitting into existing cultures. And we're also having to build on a podium above sea level, just as the folks at Masdar had. I think the challenge then, and my reaction to Masdar, was that it was fascinating, and I was delighted to actually see some detail because all I'd seen was the video. The challenge for me in all of these projects is that often you're given the piece of land to work with. And the challenge with Masdar is that it is a piece of land that is separate from and segregated from Abu Dhabi. It's a place that has to balance and provide jobs within a region of jobs and houses within a region of jobs. And while it solves for energy within the site, it's very tough to solve for commuting in and out. And so Masdar finds itself separated and segregated from the surrounding metropolitan region by a buffer of car parks, technology parks, and solar farms, and cannot, because of that sort of location in the region, really connect to and integrate within the existing city. And by and large, to me, that is the challenge we have to deal with. Most of the people in this country live in the houses that they or their descendants are going to live in 20 years. 75% of our stock is here, and additions to that stock had best be made in ways that extend existing communities, that infill existing communities, and that begin to build on the location efficiency that is already in place in our existing communities. Just another sort of Masdar thought was really, it seemed to me, the insistent attention to innovating in terms of technology at Masdar was fascinating, and we're going to, I think, be learning from it and learning from the attempts to come up with new technologies for decades to come. But I often wonder, as a sort of Schumacherian kind of thinker, why we don't look at sort of the simple existing technologies that might serve just as well. And so why we move to a segregated, grade-separated PRT system rather than a low-tech sort of streetcar system or tram system integrated within the existing blocks, eliminating the need to actually create or put it in a different podium, and trying to come up with a slow-speed technology that actually integrated well with the pedestrians, because actually people and public transport work well together. So a few thoughts there. I would just move to the question of food production, and we've been thinking a lot about this, and thinking about how across the scale from the edge on the left to the center of the city, you begin to integrate food production into the nature of the existing city. And what we've found is that there are a lot of opportunities to do that. And in the sort of middle diagram around T4, you begin to see existing blocks which are converted as London squares into allowing food. But you begin to deal with some contradictions, because if you try to create more local food within the city, your blocks become bigger. Your blocks become bigger, your density goes down, your public transport use goes down, and so there's a limit to what you can do. And in the long run, I think we're going to end up with dealing with this kind of thing, where we're beginning to modify existing communities, perhaps existing estates, to see growing food in places where we have our landscape object now. Or actually, and this may be anathema to most British people, actually converting our existing front and back gardens into places where we can begin to grow food. But in a time when we're beginning to see the art of the day begin to emulate the art of wartime Britain and austerity Britain, maybe I'm right with the curve instead of being, as usual, accused of being an old fogey from the Prince's Foundation. Thanks very much.